You are live.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is House Education on Thursday, February 20th, 2025. We're going to have a lot of testimony today on instructional scale from folks in the field to give us a better understanding of the implications of that, what it can mean, both good and bad. Before we dive into it, I just want to make clear to everybody. Yesterday, we put a committee bill here on the table. And the purpose of that was really to have a document that is accessible to the public for transparency's sake, that we start putting ideas into that we will then take up one by one. It's really there as a tool. It doesn't represent a vision or plan. It's really a question of transparency. It's not good practice to sort of put ideas on the table, then pull them back, and then put them out and pull them back without it sort of remaining in a document that exists for the public to be able to pull up and look at. So I just want to make that clear that it didn't represent some grand plan, that it represents a tool to move us forward. We could have taken other steps. We could have pulled something off the wall, stripped the contents of it, and started filling it in. Doesn't seem really fair to the sponsors of whatever bill it is you're doing that to, if you have another vehicle like a committee bill. Anyway, just want to make that clear. Okay, on to instructional scale. Up first, we have a group of 3 superintendents talk to us about what it means, the opportunities. We'll kick it right off. Libby, you have the floor, and we look forward to your testimony.
Awesome. Thank you for having me today. And I just want to say, coming to this marvelous building is a privilege for me. And I love that I sat down and the first thing I see is Fun Dip in front of a legislator's seat. So that makes me just feel right at home.
Compliments of a teacher.
Correct. For the record, my name is Libby Bonesteel. I'm the first and only superintendent Montpelier Roxbury Public Schools have had. I took the position in 2018, the first year of merger between the towns of Roxbury and Montpelier. That first year, as a naive new superintendent, I did not and could not have known the intense and emotional ramifications this merger would eventually lead to. For background, MRPS is right in the middle of the state. Working here at the State House, I'm sure you're all aware of the bustling town of Montpelier. We can see the Capitol Dome from our high school. You may be less aware of what Roxbury is like. Roxbury is a community made up of under 700 people. Some are newcomers who love the wide expanse their land offers, while others have lived there for generations. The town is split by a very large hill, creating a natural divide between the village and East Roxbury. There's a tiny post office, library, and a general store, along with a few other small businesses scattered on the main road. Roxbury Village School is the gem in the middle of the village. Many of the people who have lived in Roxbury for years took part in actually hammering the nails during the expansion of the building in the 80s. The town is very proud of their little building. Our district educates approximately 1,160 students, 1,100 of which live in Montpelier, and 60-ish live in Roxbury. Up until last year, we operated 4 school buildings, 2 elementary schools, Union Elementary School, which I'll refer to as UES, at 400 students, and Roxbury Village School, or RVS, at 40 students, a middle and a high school. From 5th grade on, all students attended school in Montpelier. On average, 5 to 7 students from Roxbury entered MSMS as 5th graders. These students were split into 4 different homerooms. While all 5th graders are starting out in a new school in our district, one could argue that this experience was quite different for a child from Roxbury than it was for a child from Montpelier. From 2018 to 2023, we were able to run a pre-K classroom at RVS. Because of exceptionally low enrollment and our inability to fill a part-time position there, we did not run a pre-K in the 23-24 school year. We ran a straight K room, which means only kindergartners in that classroom, and a multi-age 1-2 and 3-4 classroom. Had the building been open this year, there would have been 3 kindergarten students with a full-time teacher. Last year, the faculty to student ratio was approximately one faculty member for every 5 students, and there was little way to increase the ratio due to federal requirements like IDEA and the state requirements in EQS. My observation of RVS over the years was of kids and families who loved their school. and viewed it as the center of the community. Beyond RVS families, the Roxbury community members also feel that the school activity at the building was central to the health of the community. The kids spent Fridays in their neighbors' woods. They ice skated at the senior center and created their own beautiful mini farm of yummy vegetables that our food service would cook up. There was and still is an incredibly popular enrichment program run after school hours. Parents, kids, and staff describe the school community as a family. Like every school, there's also challenges. The average faculty turnover over 6 years was 25% compared to just 10% at Union Elementary. I had 3 different principals in that time span, none of whom had previous administrative experience. While teachers collaborated well inside the building, they did not have colleagues to collaborate with who taught the same curriculum. Achieving high academic standards within multi-age classrooms, particularly in mathematics, is incredibly hard to accomplish. One needs to drive 25 to 30 minutes through 3 different school districts to get from Montpelier to Roxbury, making things like sharing staff incredibly time consuming. Because of busing, the 2 elementary schools ran on different start and end times, making virtual collaboration nearly impossible. Our students at RVS struggled academically, initially scoring anywhere from 15 to 25 percentage points lower on math and literacy screeners than peers at UES, and showed slower than normal growth over time. Act 127 hit MRPS hard. Once the 5% cap was changed by the legislature, we were facing a significant tax increase, the likes of which our communities had never seen before. We were faced with having to cut significantly from our budget in order to get the tax hike down slightly. Our first budget failed rather impressively, something unheard of here in Montpelier. When faced with drastically cutting programs in all of our schools, many in the Montpelier community began voicing what they perceived to be an easy fix, busing the elementary students from RVS to UES. UES had the room. They have more services for students when in need, and all the classrooms from RVS would transfer to UES or MSMS because of the just regular yearly vacancies. Commentary ranging from polite to downright disrespectful was rife on Front Porch Forum in Montpelier, and the school board received over 300 emails on the topic. While there were some Montpelier residents supporting keeping kids at RVS, the large majority of emails to the board advocated for closing RVS. Conversely, the Roxbury community strongly advocated for continuing to educate kids at RVS. Our merger agreement is somewhat unique in that it gave the decision to close the school to the school board and did not require a town vote. From speaking to people on the merger committee and reading the meeting minutes, there were 2 schools of thought as the premise for this decision. 1, the committee knew that the town of Roxbury would never vote to close their school willingly. And 2, there needed to be a mechanism to determine the viability of the school in the future. This period between February to the second budget vote at the end of April tore my school board of 9 volunteers apart, particularly the 2 dedicated members from Roxbury. I spent nearly every moment of time during my workday either working on this challenge specifically or thinking about it. I certainly made mistakes and would do things differently if I had to endure this again. Emotions ran high, so much so that I had my first, and I hope only, restraining order established to ensure the safety of my staff and students at RVS. Public comment during board meetings was particularly hard. Roxbury proponents provided heartfelt and often very angry comments directed at the school board and myself, while community members against keeping the building open made it clear that they would vote for the budget they would not vote for the budget without closing RVS. Comments included begging the board to keep the building open for just 1 more year to give residents time for the transition, extolling all the wonderful things that happened with kids in the school building, reminiscing about childhood spent at RVS years ago, disagreements regarding whether the school board actually had the right to make this, to make this decision, challenges to Roxbury ever wanting anything to do with Montpelier in the first place. They wanted to go to U32 over with Stephen there. Assertions that Montpelier was subsidizing Roxbury, statements regarding the system being rigged against Roxbury and that the district owed Roxbury, and perhaps the most searing, repeatedly accusing the board and superintendent of ripping the heart out of the community. In the end, the school board voted to bus the students to UES. This reduced our budget by approximately $1.5 million and brought the tax burden down to a still high 13.84% increase in Montpelier and a 3.59 increase in Roxbury. Our second vote passed because of Montpelier voters. It did not pass in Roxbury. The board commissioned a transition committee to ensure we supported our students. The main topics of conversation centered around busing and maintaining a sense of community in Roxbury through after-school enrichment. Union Elementary worked intentionally to welcome students from Roxbury through playgroups and placements. From all I've been told, so far this year, busing stinks. And most of the students, once they get off that bus, are thriving, or at the very least, happy. Early data shows that additional support UES can offer is helping students from Roxbury grow at a faster clip in literacy and math. I've been a superintendent through a global pandemic and led my district through historic flooding, where we had 2 million gallons of water in our basement at the high school. I calmed terrified parents when police helicopters swirled above us, while officers stormed our building with high caliber weapons during a fake swatting incident. I've seen and led through crises. Closing Roxbury and being told repeatedly by community members that I didn't care about the young people who I have spent my 28-year career dedicated to was the one situation that kept me awake night after night. It quite literally changed who I am as a person and a leader. Patrick Green, who I believe you'll hear from later on today, superintendent of Mount Abraham, once said to me, "You will never win this argument because your reasoning is based on logic and the community's is based on emotion. Emotion will win every time." He's 100% correct. While our kids are doing well, it will take years to build the bridge between Roxbury and Montpelier communities. Small schools are something this legislature is going to have to contend with. I ask that you please take the burden off of superintendents and school boards to make these impossible decisions. The state must think about not only if, when, or how to close the buildings, but also how to support small towns once the building is closed. The town of Roxbury will likely take on this burden and has pulled together a variety of great ideas. My hope is that they can create a thriving community center. It takes money and organizational know-how to do this, a burden we have now placed on their select board, another group of 5 volunteers. If we as a state decide that we can no longer afford the system of small schools we have in place, it is the state who needs to step in to support our communities. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Sure, I'll start right off with one that you posed. When, if, and how do we close small schools if they are shown to be uneconomical, unviable, and not providing sufficient opportunities for students?
I think you just answered your question. If they prove to be non-economical or providing opportunities for students. Last night we had a board meeting. I was telling Jay and Chelsea before I started around our flexible pathways program at the high school, and a young man named Logan, who will be off to Yale in the fall, is a lottery student and lives in Twinfield and chose to come to Montpelier through our lottery system here in central Vermont. And he made the statement last night, I have had so many more opportunities because I chose to go to Montpelier High School as a 14-year-old than I would have if I had stayed at Twinfield. And that's not a knock on my colleagues at Twinfield. It's just accurate, right? He could take advantage of so many more systems and structures that we have in place in order to get the experiences to send him to Yale in the fall, which was his dream to do. So I think that you answered your own question, sir, with
the how then.
Yeah, the how is the bigger question. Because I read through the bill that you all looked through yesterday from I can't remember the representative, I'm sorry, but I watched that testimony and I read through that bill. And I think there are some good possibilities in there. The challenge is that when you have communities, the community voice is important and it will never be positive. So how do you weigh that against logic? That's the challenge for me, because the logical thing to do was to close Roxbury in this situation. That is the logical thing to do, except it would never, when you look at it from a community member's perspective, there's logic has nothing to do with it. It is my person who has a small business is worried it's going to be a derelict building. And then no people will, so there has to be some support, I think, on the other side that communities can look to in order to think of the future, instead of really thinking of the past and only the past, because that's where a lot of the sentiment lies.
So, under a future state of fewer districts, um, as we go to sort of thinking about governance scale, that doesn't necessarily translate to, that doesn't eliminate the problem. Still a school board being left with that decision. And so we struggle in this committee as to who, what are the metrics? How do you apply the metrics? Who then makes the final decision? Is it a base closing commission? Is it the State Board of Education? Is it the Secretary of Education? That's where we really struggle. And and if we take it to a grander scale, we could say, if Montpelier High School needs $100 million renovation in a floodplain, if Montpelier are going to be willing to say, well, maybe Montpelier High School is not the best thing to have.
You're 100% correct there in so many things. I personally think that the decision can't come from a town vote. I think that is an obvious one, because it's just too hard for our community members who are so attached to these buildings. And when I say that, I heard more public comment of people's experience in Roxbury 40 years ago as a reason to keep the school open. And I'm not belittling that experience or judging it in any way. They obviously had a beautiful experience there in their memory. That's a lot of the reason why they wanted to keep that building open, was because of we had people who don't have students in the school come to testify. We had people who were homeschooling their children come testify repeatedly about the beauty of that school, who were choosing not to send their children to that school because of their experience there. So I think that one right there for state statute would be easy. I think that I think that the final decision, whatever process is put in place, and when I say I made mistakes, that's the piece, like we didn't have time for a process because we were in a tight budget situation. There has to be some sort of process to go through this. I think the final decision could lie with an entity like the State Board of Education, with clear guidelines as to how to keep the building open. If you can't check the boxes, then I can't see the building being viable.
Representative Brady.
What do you see as the relationship between some school consolidation or moving to some schools of more scale versus district consolidation and scale when it comes to the actual student experience and quality? Kind of like you're talking about this too, but in terms of that, on the ground experience of a student going through the system, what's the order of operations maybe, and where do you actually see the sort of difference in the student's experience potentially?
If I were going to see the order of operations, I'd probably see the districts combining first, because right now, Stephen is my next door neighbor in Wash Central. We can talk to each other about what our experiences are, or what our kids' experiences are from our own perspectives. But until one of us as a superintendent walks through the buildings and can see and compare what's happening in school buildings, we couldn't make that decision ourselves. Both of us, I think, have the hunch that if we were to merge, then our students, we could merge into one high school. They could have more opportunities than they currently do. They'd have larger class sizes in some of those more rigorous coursework. So it's more lively debate and all that kind of good stuff. Our middle school students could perhaps have more opportunities than they do now if we were able to do that. So there are definite positives I can imagine, but until I walk into the buildings and compare what's there as a superintendent, I'm making assumptions, not out of any kind of knowledge. So I would think that districts are first, with the caveat of you have to fund them continually. You can't you can't expect districts to merge slash funding and expect there to be all these savings because you have less meat, right? That's not going to happen. And so the funding has to maintain the programming in order to see what we can save, in order to make good decisions.
Yes, Representative Long.
You have mentioned, thank you for that really comprehensive testimony. You've mentioned several times in there about support for communities when a school closes. Two parts to this question. Do you think that gets in the way of supporting it, period? I mean, will it cause people, because we don't have supports, we don't know what to do with the building, we don't know how to move forward without our school, I'm not going to be able to support this. And do you think that it is financial resources that a community needs? Is it, do they need to have an engineer? Do they need to have lawyers?
Yeah.
So what is it? What kind of supports do you think a community needs?
So I think yes to your first question, that does get in the way. So we are, in order to maintain with heat, electric,
Mhm.
all that kind of good stuff, the facility, it's about $60,000 to $70,000 to maintain Roxbury. So if the Roxbury Select Board decides to take that on for $1, then they are adding automatically $60,000 to $70,000 to their tax base. And Roxbury has a very low tax base. And so that's a significant increase that they'd be asking. That was a major sticking point to this, to when people were thinking logically, that was a major sticking point.
Okay.
And so there is that piece. It's because town taxes are so different than school taxes, right? It's here's your bill and here's what you're taxed. So we are upping that bill. So yes, there is a monetary factor of how do we do that. The second piece is that I believe that it's more of know-how, combined with that upkeep and organizational skills. Our Roxbury Select Boards, while they're wonderful people, are taking on literally a new business. If they make a community center, that's a business that the town is taking on that currently does not have the capacity to take that on. And they've got some grant money that they're working with an organization to try to figure it out. But that's a big ask of select boards in the town, right? If we had some sort of support system or mechanism to do some community planning around what could be done, and then here are your steps for how to do that, select board, I think that would go a long way for people to be like, okay, it's not going to be a derelict building. It's not going to have vines growing all over it.
Thank you.
I remember going to one of the towns I represent to a select board meeting, and the select board made very clear that if their town if they were to lose their small school, there was no way they would ever take that building back because it was nothing but a huge liability.
And I'm sure some buildings are like that. Roxbury has the benefit that building is in beautiful condition. There's no facilities upgrade that needs to happen unless they choose to do so themselves. So that's a benefit to Roxbury that may not be in every community, as you said, Rep. Conlon.
All right, we've got, did you have another question?
You said in the testimony, you saved 1.5 million sort of the immediate busing to a different school. How do you think about quantifying the just financial part of decision savings? Is it
What was in that?
sort of, and then also that 1.5, so then you assume that's 1.5 less than you would have had to spend this year and the next year. And the savings, I think we're all looking for the giant bag of money. And obviously it's more about the sort of long-term impact of that 1.5, whatever it is, potentially as it continued on your budget and within your.
So I don't know if it has a continuation, right? That's a one-time savings.
Right, yeah.
Like I said many times this board,
Yeah.
this budget season, I don't have a building to close anymore. We have to figure that out. So the savings came from maintenance, operational costs, as well as staff. Staff is where you get the most savings from staffing and benefits. We had natural turnover in our other buildings, and the classroom teachers folded in. So that was 4 positions. The rest of the positions, which we had part-time PE, part-time art, part-time, all of those were ripped. The principal was ripped. The nurse was ripped. So all the other positions were ripped, and that's where the primary driving of savings. And then also, the natural piece that my business manager does around what piece of my salary, how, if we were to quantify my salary cost of supporting 4 buildings, what would Roxbury's piece be? And multiply that by other central office employees. That's where all the savings came from.
Were those positions that were ripped able to find work elsewhere and get their educational careers back on track?
I'm not sure. If we didn't have any, we wouldn't know that unless they asked for a reference. So I know a couple did, but that would have gone to principals and other colleagues, not me.
Thank you. We've got two other superintendents to hear from. And
Thank you.
if you and U32 do have a talk, I'll be sure to come back and tell you my 40-year-old memories.
Please do.
Right. Morning.
Morning.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me here. I'm Stephen Dellinger Pate. I'm the current superintendent of the Washington Central Unified Union School District. We are the donut around Montpelier. And we may refer to ourselves as that many times. So I've just started as superintendent this school year after previously serving as the principal at U32 in the same district for the past 10 years. And prior to that, I served 17 years in the role of assistant superintendent, principal, director of math and technology, and my favorite one was a math teacher. I still love that part. And I've worked in schools that range in size from 50 to 2,000 plus in rural, suburban, and urban districts. I've worked in the magnet, charter, and public school systems. And I've supervised schools with enrollments over 4,000 students in a district of 32,000. So I come to you now to hopefully offer some perspective on the challenges and experiences I encountered in meeting student needs in a variety of these school configurations. So a little bit about our district. We're the towns of Berlin, Calais, East Montpelier, Middlesex, and Worcester. And we have 5 pre-K through 6 elementary schools, 1 in each town, and the Union Middle and High School grades 7 through 12. Our total enrollment for our district right now is 1,380 students. That's approximately 200 students fewer than a decade ago, and is projected to drop by an additional 200 students in the next decade. Our elementary schools currently have enrollments of 73 students, 93 students, 121, 187, and 210. So you see we run a pretty good gamut there. And our middle and high school has an enrollment of 697 students right now. I will say that our school board, our community, and staff have been working together over the past year and a half to determine the best possible configuration of schools. You've probably seen in the news our configuration committees work and the grade levels that allow us to provide the highest quality education for our students. So what I want to kind of highlight are some of the challenges that we've identified through this process. So we've gone through one configuration round that ended in a board vote not to move any configuration studies forward. Unlike Libby's articles of agreement, our articles require each town in which those elementary schools reside to vote to close their schools. It is not the decision of the school board. The school board only votes to send that to the towns for their consideration. So some of the challenges that we face, staffing is definitely one of those. So providing adequate staffing levels in support positions can be very difficult and can create inequities across schools. So a school of 73 students with a full-time school nurse, librarian, or school counselor doesn't have the same workload and job responsibilities as one of those positions in a school of 210. So balancing those positions proves to be very difficult at times as to what are the roles and responsibilities for those positions and what services can we provide between those schools. So the need for allied arts positions in small elementary schools also means that some of our employees get split across multiple buildings during the school week. Our grade level configurations are also a big challenge. So this is how we configure grade levels at our individual school. So one school may have 2 classes of second grade while another has a combined first and second grade class. I'd like to give you an example. One of our elementary schools has last year had a grade 2-3 classroom, and this year it has a grade 3-4 classroom. So if you can imagine the kids who were in 3rd grade last year were primarily subjected to a 2nd and 3rd grade curriculum, while this year they're in a 3rd, 4th grade configuration that has a 3-4 grade level curriculum. That means that they may or may not get all aspects of the 3rd grade curriculum because of the needs of the other students who are in that classroom. And it can prove very difficult. And just within our district, so pre-kindergarten through 6th grade level, we have 12 different classroom configurations across our district, from a pre-K classroom to a straight grade level 6th grade classroom. And I can tell you every combination in between and all of that. What that really creates for us is a very difficult ability to provide what's called a consistent and guaranteed curriculum. And so the students at one school may not get the same curriculum as students at another school. And the challenge for our teachers is to be able to provide an ever-changing curricular structure. So if a school is able to maintain either straight grade levels, which is one option, or multi-age classrooms, if we can maintain a consistent pattern of that, our curriculum can be consistent as well. Asking a teacher to teach a different curriculum every year based upon the students that are there because of the student numbers that are in the school building itself, it's a big ask of any of our educators. And as an administrator, I can't guarantee that the child in one school has received the same curricular or instructional focus that children in other schools can. It is one of the biggest challenges within a system in which classroom sizes fluctuate in a small school system. And then Libby kind of pointed out at the high school and middle school level, because we've had these conversations, is some of our advanced classes, we don't have enough students to really create a robust environment. I have 3 students in a high school classroom in some of my upper level classes. But it also means that intervention services can be really affected as well. So our intervention services means that a student who could benefit from actually a small group is in an individual situation. And that individual situation may not be their best approach to learning, where they need to hear what other students are thinking and saying, and they're able to provide a more robust education. It also means that you're committing one adult to one kid in a situation where the one adult could be working with 3 or 4 kids. So those are really inefficient ways for us to deliver some of our services and some of the work that we do there. It also creates within our intervention services difficulties in our staffing. So we may have one teacher in one school who is trained to deliver a reading program, a very specialized reading program, Orton Gillingham, if you've heard of it. That teacher may be able to provide those services to the kids within one elementary school, but because I don't have someone trained in another elementary school, that service may not be as easily provided to them. We may have to outsource that. We may have to contract with that, or we may have to find just a different service for the kid to meet their needs. Those aren't really efficient ways to deliver intervention services when we spread it across a full district like this. And I would say that we actually had a moment this last week where we were able to bring our elementary teachers together in grade level groups so that they could do some work around mathematics. That is a luxury for us to be able to do. Many of our teachers work in isolation in their grade levels because they don't have a grade level partner. And without having that grade level partner, they're just kind of making decisions on their own. And I will say from my experience as a teacher, just having another teacher to run to and say, hey, I'm struggling with this kid, or I'm struggling with this concept. How have you done that in the past? It is really an effective way to do. In one of my schools, I only have 4 classrooms in one of my elementary schools. There is not a lot of time for those teachers to communicate with each other. And they're also dealing with multi-grade classrooms as it is already. So having a few opportunities that we carve out right now for our teachers to talk to each other about those needs and wants of the kids, those are super luxurious moments. We've had 1 or 2 a year. When we have a larger school, you have the ability to group people into professional development where they can communicate with each other. And then I would also say that we have learned that transportation, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, is quite the challenge. And how do we create transportation systems that don't increase ride times, that fill buses, and are able to create stops that aren't a great distance away from some of our kids, is quite the challenge. That actually isn't always as difficult with fewer schools. So we look at U32 as a centralized school. Our kids come from the outskirts and they come straight in. When we bus within a small town, we have to drive circles around in that small town, or in some of our towns, there is no circle. They have to drive one way from the school and the other way from the school with one bus. Those can create longer ride times than if we just bring those buses into centralized schools.
Aren't those buses going around in circles picking up the kids to go to U32 as well?
Not as much, because they come in straight lines, so they can go through multiple towns to get to U32. So we can pick up students in Worcester and in Middlesex, as opposed to having to just do the Worcester for one elementary school or do just Middlesex. We can have 2 buses come through and do that kind of work. So the ride times don't tend to increase in those situations. I would also note that about a third of my kids come through Montpelier to get
Yeah,
to.
we wave to them every
Yes,
day.
so we have more buses in Montpelier than Montpelier has. And so we have a lot there. But I think Libby pointed out one thing that is really crucial, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that community identity around their schools. One of our biggest discussions, exactly as Libby was saying, around Roxbury, are the same discussions that we've had around schools like Doty Elementary or Callis Elementary. Any of our elementary schools, honestly, they have an identity in their towns, and really dealing with that is a difficult decision to make. Those schools are seen as hubs. They're seen as community centers. There's a lot of wonderful things that happen at those schools and have happened at them for decades now. So that is one of those critical pieces of how do we overcome that challenge. I think you guys already discussed that quite a bit. And I also think that what we learned, one of the most important things we learned in our process around configuration is that if you start with a discussion about structure and budget, you miss the conversations have to be around programming and opportunities. What are the opportunities that we can afford students if we have more kids in a school? What are the additional resources that we can provide? So if we have enough kids in a school, we can provide a full-time nurse, we can provide a full-time school counselor, we can provide a social worker across multiple schools. Really being able to help people understand what's the programming and what are those options that are expanded is one of the most important and critical things. And so I also don't want to leave you with the impression that our district doesn't have some great things going on in all of this struggle. And I want to just point out, I mentioned about one of our elementary art teachers. She visits 4 buildings and provides an amazing art program for our kids. But what she could do if she didn't have to travel would be even better. And so those are some of those big challenges. We want to really say our educators are doing a lot to make sure that these things work. How can we create systems in which our educators don't have as many struggles to meet those student needs is one of the biggest things that we need to illustrate. And so I would say at the heart of our discussions around school configuration in Washington Central is determining that level of service that we'll provide to our school community. And questions like mental health service, building use, developing community schools, and course offerings are key to what the community's indicated they want. And how we balance the desire for services with financial sustainability is the struggle that our communities face. So thank you for your time today. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions? So the experience that your district has had, I know some of it predates your time there, but the school board put a proposal on the table to do some consolidating.
Yes, so that doesn't predate me. So I was in the district as a part of the committee itself as we did the work. So our board created what they called a configuration committee. That committee looked at multiple options, talked with the community. Our full board had input. We had some options about should we close 2 of our elementary schools and reconfigure the remaining 3. That option was voted down in our board and not taken to our communities, which it would have had to have gone for the communities to approve those closures.
One of the things we are talking about class size minimums. And I think one of the questions we have for superintendents who are in front of us today is, short of telling you what schools to open or close, class size minimums seem to be programmatically a good thing.
Yes.
But they will also lead to hard decisions that a school board may have to take in order to meet those class size minimums.
You're exactly right. I mean, I think that one of the things around our class size minimums that we saw, remember I told you about all those configurations of classes that we have, that's an effort to bring the class sizes up. But it doesn't always meet the student needs when we create those pieces. So grade level sizes and classroom level sizes are 2 different conversations sometimes that get intermingled for us. I would say that what we want is a class size that's large enough to have a diversity of thought, to be able to have a variety of instructional groupings in that, and allow us to create a consistent kind of progression of classes for the student as they go through our school. We don't want the number of kids in any one grade level to drive the configuration of that school from year to year. We want there to be a consistent number. And that's where you look at what are the right class sizes to make that happen. And I've seen the numbers that have been out there. Those are numbers that we promote as a school district as well. This is what we want in any way possible.
Committee members, any other questions? Great, we'll move on to our
you.
third
Thank you very much.
superintendent. He is. But you do not have a. Won't have her signing yet. Maybe while we are awaiting Penny's arrival. Oh, great. Okay. Good morning, Penny.
Morning.
We just heard from two of your colleagues and we are ready for your testimony if you're ready to provide it.
I am. I did provide a document, 3-page document for everyone. Did you have a chance to look that over?
I would say we had an opportunity to open it up in front of us right now.
Okay. So would you prefer that I read from that in order to have that on record, or how would you like me to proceed?
It is on record by us posting it. We have it. You can provide your testimony in whatever way you feel is most effective.
Okay. Good morning. I'm the superintendent of Orleans Central, Penny Chamberlain. This is my 4th year here. And our Orleans Central Supervisory Union consists of 1,100 students, just slightly under that, not much. We've stayed pretty consistent. About 300 staff. We have 5 K-8 schools, 1 K-6 school that used to be a K-8 2 years ago, 1 9 through 12 high school, and 2 preschools with up to 65 students in the preschool, which is also included in the 1,100 number. So the areas that I was looking to speak with you about today was our staffing crises that we've had over the last 4 years. 2 years ago, we started out with onboarding 2 years in a row, 100 staff. This is teachers, all of our staff out of 300. So that caused quite a shift in our delivery model and ability to provide seasoned people in our classrooms. We currently have 31 teachers who are provisionally licensed and 4 or so that are on emergency licenses within our faculty, and all of them are assigned to our elementary and middle school, which has a total of 51 staff. So 31 out of 51 in our elementary and middle school are provisionally licensed staff. That's a large percentage. With a high turnover of staff and the shortage, we've also been short on mentors. So being able to locate skilled teachers within our district and even outside of our district to mentor our new teachers has also been a challenge. I will say this past school year, we feel we're coming out of that crisis somewhat. And I say that because we've onboarded about 50 to 60 people instead of 100. If you look at the numbers, I know that wouldn't add up exactly because some people come and go within a year or 2 years, but that's almost a full staff turnover across our entire SU if you're looking at just numbers in that way. Turnover comes from several different directions. Inexperienced staff get overwhelmed, they can't continue. They step into a role that they had a certain preconceived notion about, and then they realize this is really difficult. It's very difficult to teach in today's circumstance and environment and situation. And it's also hard to also be going to school and taking classes at the same time to earn your degree while you're teaching. We have, it's been a pattern over the last 2 years to 3 years of some staff resigning mid-year, definitely at the end of their first year because of those reasons. There's also a lack of training prior to stepping into a classroom, which is difficult because you need to have funding, time within your calendar, and hopefully the new hire happens early enough in the year to be able to make that happen. New people have a lot of stress and anxiety. There's stress here with lack of adequate housing for our new folks that moved to the Orleans Central NEK region. So these are all the areas that compound our staffing crisis that we're seeing. And I do say we're coming out of it, but we are not out of it yet. And it will take a couple of years to fully realize where we are. Another challenge for us beyond the staffing is the failing and aging facilities, including our Glover School and our Orleans School. Most recently that had issues, Glover had issues with their mold coming onto them through some high rain storms that we had over the last year and a half. And then Orleans had a main water break in their town road that led to their school. So, and within the school itself. So that caused us to have to relocate our Glover students, about 84 kids and 25 staff. And because of our enrollment numbers are not drastically low, we were not able to fully accommodate all of the Glover students within our current school structure of K-8. So we had to use a town hall and a church in order to house our students for the first 3 months of school. About 2 months of school. We were fortunate to be able to start the work on Glover in June, as soon as the kids had left the building, and with a very positive and surprising construction process, we were able to open our doors again to our kiddos in the middle of October to get them back into our building in a phased way. So we're very fortunate there. Orleans, unfortunately, is still challenged with the flooding that happened from the water main break that took over their first floor, which include their kitchen and their gymnasium. And they are having challenges still now with the gymnasium. And this happened in May of last year. So the last 3 weeks of school for Orleans, we had to find a place for those children, and we relocated them to local schools and library to finish the school year. So the gym challenge right now, which is an interesting one, is when we had to do asbestos testing, and the rubber floor in the gym was affected by the flooding. We had to have that removed. Then we had to do air testing, and part of that air testing was testing for mercury, and we found out that mercury was embedded in the concrete of the gym floor. So we spent months grinding down portions of that gym floor to see how far the mercury went down. And we are now at the point of jackhammering out that entire floor, all the concrete, to be able to replace that so that we can fully get rid of that contamination. So these are things that come about from a water main leak, and nothing that you could prepare for or predict, but it's just interesting to share that with you. I will say our student enrollments are steady, which is a good thing, but also a challenge. When one of our schools goes down for any reason, we need to figure out how we're going to continue educating our kiddos across the district. I also looked at benefits, challenges, and shortcomings. So benefits of RSU, I feel, I am retiring in June, and I after 36 years in public education, I just really feel this was a great place for me to bring my career to a close, in that Orleans Central is very unique and has some very unique communities, small rural communities. We have small rural schools, but they're very dedicated. You know, the taxpayers and stakeholders are very dedicated to their school. Hence, some of the challenges that we see coming, or things that we were trying to do in the past, like reconfiguring our schools when our staffing was so short. It was not well accepted by the community. And I will share where we currently are, because that's a great place to be at this point. So I do have some good positive things to share when we're done. The challenge in our school, in our district, as small as we are, it does take about 45 minutes to drive from one side of that SU to the other, just to have staff come together and work together, or have meetings with administrator, or let's say a family has kiddos in 2 different schools and they've got a bit of a distance to travel. I already talked about the challenges with the temporary closings. I won't go around that. Challenges with recommended class sizes. I heard you talking to Stephen a little bit about that. We have a 10 student minimum and a 20 student maximum for most of our K-8 grade levels. And the 10 minimum is a little small. In a recent reconfiguration that was just board approved a few weeks ago, we're going to be changing that for next year. And I'll talk about that and how that has raised our student teacher ratio slightly. It's a big shift for our district, but it did only gain us a little bit of an improvement in our teacher student ratios. But again, it's an improvement. So I'm going to take that as a win with that. Rising costs of education, the impacts on our local communities. Our community cannot support or sustain a long-term, large-scale bond to make repairs to our schools. We're limping along. We're using our capital reserve funds. We're doing the best we can to spread those funds across our small schools. We've worked closely for 2 years with Truex Cullens, and we'll be finalizing our work with them on a long-term facility plan that will have all of the data and the information needed to support any future change that might be coming to us, whether it's planned or something that comes from the state. But the ability for our taxpayers to shoulder if it's a 70 or 80% cost of a bond or construction bond and the state picking up a 30%, let's just use that as an example, they wouldn't be able to do it. So that's a concern I have where things are moving forward and where we may be as an SU. Challenges overall, school consolidation, lack of school construction aid, uncertainty of the state's position as it changes frequently, the intensity of the governor's plan. I understand the governor's plan. I don't necessarily disagree with the thought behind what needs to happen. But I do feel the timeline's extremely aggressive, and I don't think that everything within the phases of those timelines have actually been thoroughly thought out and vetted, but I know the VSA is working on some recommendations there. We do need a timeline that covers something 5 to 7 years, not 3 years. I always try to keep in mind what's good for children, what's the best for the kiddos in our state versus trying to reduce certain tax rates or impacts on education. I know there's a money focus, there needs to be a funding focus, but at the same time, the rate at which we make those changes could have a huge impact on our children, at least in our more rural areas. I'll end with the shortcomings. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of questions for me when I say what I'm saying, but I've watched this for a long time, different phases. I've been through 2 reconfiguration attempts in our district, and the final one came where the board, after having some time to think about and process and plan for the future, they realized in order to start moving toward a direction of some sort of consolidation or reconfiguration, that they decided to do grade banding in our K-8, our 6 K-8 schools. So we will have 3 middle schools, grades 5 through 8, and 3 elementary schools, K-4, in our Orleans Central Supervisory Union beginning July 1st. So now you can imagine what we're doing to get prepared for that when it comes to meeting our CBA, posting vacancies, filling vacancies, and looking at any internal transfers and such that might be happening. But the message I want to leave is that the grade banding is extremely beneficial for kids. It's going to allow us to have 2 classes per grade level in a building. And that might sound odd that we're getting to that, but right now we have 1 class per grade in our buildings and have had for decades. So now kids will be able to mix and have increase their peer circle. Teachers the same. With this many new teachers, instead of being a singular teacher kind of isolated in that building of K-8, they will now have a teaching partner. It'll allow us to use our resources a little bit better based on grade levels and what's appropriate. The challenge now is families worrying about transportation, although given the way our transportation runs in this rural district, it probably won't change that much because our configuration has taken into consideration the local area. So it's based on sister schools. So Albany and Irisburg are paired. Irisburg's a K4, Albany's a 5-8. Glover and Barton are paired. They're near each other. And we look at Barton's large number of students. Barton's a K4 and Glover will be a 5-8. And then we have Orleans and Brownington. Brownington's going to be the middle school 5-8 and Orleans will be the K4 school. And this is a model that the board has agreed to do and implement for at least 1 year. So this is what our hope is that we get into this process and we're realizing the benefits of it as it rolls out. In closing, I just want to bring up that we are lacking as a state in addressing the school funding structure and a timeline to allow for change to take place. To put something in place and then to change it within months and then to change it again. Usually you put something in place and you work through it, you gather your data, you reflect, you come back, you analyze, and then you make another change. But that seems to be a pretty volatile process right now. We're lacking in a vision that supports that long-term vision for Vermont, not just putting out fires in different areas. Needs to be a structured long-term change. There really needs to be a lot of transparency and inclusion and detail for the phases of those change and inclusion when I talk about other groups, whether it's the VSA, VPA, VSBA, having, and I think that's starting to happen. Early on, it didn't feel like it was quite there. Lacking in resources at the state, district, and SU level to support those needed changes. So while we want this change to happen, how do we actually fund that? And I'll give an example. I've got 640 students, 51 teaching staff who are going through a pretty radical change starting in the end of the school year in June to reopen in a newly grade banded sister school model, which has increased our average student teacher ratio from a 9 to 10 to 1 to a 12 and 13 to 1. So we're making gains. We're trying to do that to help the state. What the state would like to do. We're trying to move forward. But I don't have any wiggle room with the 175 student days, waiving a day or two at the end of the school year to bring all those staff together to figure out before they take off for the summer, how are we going to do that? And they're going to arrive back in August. So I will either need to pay for those additional days for staff, which also is not in our budget. So there's a financial component to every structured change and phase that even if it's in a small district or it's statewide. And I feel that we haven't really embraced that to think about that and what that looks like. I really want us to focus on funding and infrastructure, facilities, construction aid, staffing and training, and then the overall governance structure for the state of Vermont when it comes to pre-K-12 public education.
Thank you very much. You make me happy and sad at the same time.
I'm glad for the happy part, but there has to be a little bit sad to be happy.
No, we continue to struggle with school construction as just something and I think you're really stating a reality, but it probably shouldn't stop us from moving forward. But that even at a 30% state share,
Something.
you still probably wouldn't be able to pass a bond.
Correct.
That's a little hard to digest, but I think it is a reality.
Yeah.
But not one that should make us give up on it. I think your innovative work to increase scale. You talked a bit about the benefits to the teachers who now will have a partner teacher within the same building. That must be a huge benefit.
Huge.
To go from total isolation. What about the kids? What to those larger classes? Having two classes, can you talk a little bit about the opportunities that expand there?
Yeah, absolutely. The kiddos get to expand their classmates, their social circle, because right now they've been with the same group of kids from kindergarten, sometimes pre-K, all the way to 8th grade. And you can imagine if you're with the same group of 9 to 15 kids all the time, it's a little strenuous. So it does cause perhaps some uptick in some of our behavior issues. I will say that we actually have an example because I mentioned I have one K-6 school, that's Irisburg. 2 years ago, could be 3 years ago, we lost our middle school teachers middle of the school year for Irisburg. And they left for personal reasons. It wasn't, about environment. They just, again, people were under stress and things happen in life. And maybe we had a couple of FMLA medical leaves as well. So that put us in a predicament with our 7th and 8th grade in Irisburg, and we had to figure out how to educate the children. So across a lot of very difficult conversations with the board and the community and the staff and the families, we actually closed the 7th and 8th grade for Irisburg School on over December Christmas break. That's another thing that was very challenging. And opened right after that, where the kids were in smaller groups, moved out into our other grades 7 and 8. We anticipated to have a lot of challenging conversations, and it didn't happen. It was quiet. And then I thought, well, that's a little concerning too, because it's got to be happening somewhere. But we just all stayed really in close contact. I met with teachers frequently. The principals met with families. We just kept that check-in going to figure out why we weren't hearing much and what we ended up gathering, because April Brown, who was the who still is the principal there, who went through this transition in her first year, went to the other schools where her kiddos went to. So she went around and checked in on them, individually. And what happened was the students were starting to realize new relationships, and they were happier in school. Not that they weren't happy at Irisburg, but it changed for them. And it made our classes a little bit larger in a couple of different schools, because they didn't all go spread out across all the schools. It was a couple of schools. We tried to keep them together in their cohort. I did not have a single parent email or phone call or anything negative happening at board meetings during, public floor from the public. So we actually, through 2 years, experienced that to work well. And this is kind of what we're doing now. We're starting to move students from a particular hometown school into a neighboring town. And teachers are very excited about it. And then we got to last year, the board asked how come we weren't reopening Irisburg's 7th and 8th. And mainly we didn't have applicants for teachers. We just are that short. We were trying to fill the other positions in middle school, and we still will have a bit of a shortage in middle school coming this spring and into next fall. And the board was fine with just continuing with Irisburg as a K-6 school. So it happened in one of our communities already, and we're hoping that this will happen in a good way, because with a sister school model, half of your teachers and half of your students are going to that other school. So you're still retaining some teachers and some students and families in their hometown. So that's doing it halfway, basically crossing over town lines. But you are still moving half of your students and half of your staff into another school. So bringing those groups together in communities will be something we'll be focusing on. And then for the students. So we have data that it's worked out really well to have larger class sizes for kids. When you get down into 7, 9, and 10, that's actually a difficult class size to manage.
Thank you. We had previous testimony about the Montpelier Roxbury transition. And here in your testimony, there's a kind of a message I'm hearing is that the kids are all right going through these transitions. Maybe not the adults. Kids seem to be okay.
Yeah. I actually have a meeting this afternoon with my principals to walk through some of those processes. I think, maybe from the outside, as people look into a change like this in a school, in a SU, it's like, oh, it's just on paper. We're moving people. But there's components of your collective bargaining agreement that make that quite challenging. So as teachers are getting ready to sign contracts April 1st for next school year, it's going to look very different. So we're trying to And I also had to meet with my 31 licensed staff. I've met with every one of them over the last 6 weeks to review their progress to make sure they're on track to be fully licensed. So there's a lot happening leading up to the actual shift to this new model. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes going on. We also have school choice, a school
Right.
choice policy that's available to our K-8 schools. That's wide open right now. I just checked today. The deadline's going to come for those applications after February break, and we have 4 families so far. So that has not flooded in as I was anticipating yet. Maybe that'll happen over the break, but yeah, I think the adults, when they hear the teachers are okay with it and the teachers are looking forward to it, they're looking forward to that camaraderie and that support, and just that professional connection that they're going to be able to have that, you know, only happened on an afternoon PLC early release day or an in-service day. I think we're going to see the value really quickly. That's my anticipation. I won't be around for that, but that's what I'm hoping.
Rep. Brady.
I think this is a rhetorical question, but we've been talking about class size minimums, obviously appreciate all of this testimony and work you're doing. But if we take class size minimums as a sort of lever, a goal for better opportunities, better programming, better consistency, there are some facilities realities that we have to look at the same time. Like, it sounds like what you're saying in your district is that even if you chose to, or we said you had to get down to 3 schools, there isn't room physically in the buildings that exist now. There would have to be some expand, whether it's a whole new building or just some reconfiguring and renovating of some buildings. Some of the physical movement couldn't even happen in the footprint that exists right now.
Absolutely, you're spot on.
Okay.
That's one of the
clarifying.
reasons I've pushed to have the relationship with Truex Collins and move forward with the long-term facility planning.
Yeah.
Because part of those options, we're now down to 4 potential models for the future, whenever that comes. It's not, you know, some people think we're building a school like tomorrow. That's not happening. This is for the 5 to 10 year outlook, if and when things start to come forward from the state level. Yes, we have schools like Brownington and Albany who have, you know, great buildings. They're old, but they still need to have some work done. But we're limited by their class facility size, the structure of the actual classroom to put, let's say, 14 or 15 middle school bodies in. And then on top of that, you tend to have 1 or 2 one-to-one paras or assistive personnel in that room as well. So you start to reach the capacity of those smaller classrooms really quickly. So that's a huge concern for us because there would be no way we will not ever be able to downsize even by 1 building because we've already been forced to do that with Glover and a little bit with Orleans, realizing we can't fit it all in. Reducing even by 1 building out of our K6 or our K8 schools with 6 of them, we would have to renovate a couple of other schools. And that renovation could cost anywhere between, if you're looking at renovating 2 schools or even 3, I'm just going to ballpark it, it would probably be 20 to 25 million on the low end of renovating, because as you know, when you start to renovating older buildings, other code and things come at you that you have to do. So yeah, that's exactly what our long-term facility plan is outlining for us. If we had to go to one of these 4 models, here's all the cost implications. Here's long-term cost savings. There are savings eventually, but you got to get out the gate and get the bond approved for your local rural communities. And quite frankly, I think that will be, I'm not even sure our communities here could handle a $20 million bond, even if it would last for the next 20 to 25 years.
Representative Harple.
I was surprised to hear you say that the school board agreed to try this sister school model for a year. I thought that it was more permanent than that. So can you just clarify for me, are you considering a scenario in which you go back to all the regular schools in a year if it doesn't work out?
No, for now, what they were saying for 1 year, because we're trying to slow or lessen staff movement across the schools. So we're trying to keep it saying, this is the model we're going to focus on, and we're going to make sure that the data supports doing that. But they made their decision for a year. They will revisit it again, probably in December of next year, to get a pulse on where things are. They'll hear updates at every board meeting, but it most likely will continue because it will work. It will be a good thing. We just, through our CBA and some of the articles in our CBA, that we're trying to not necessarily pause, but perhaps slow a little bit in order to make this happen. So that's one of those stages that we have to look at. And otherwise, I could be sitting here with 40 grievances on my desk easily. But yes, I don't anticipate this to change. I think it is a natural move toward whatever's coming next. I think it just is a good, sensible way to do that. What comes throughout next year, we'll just have to see. But I think the positivity of it will be amazing, and they'll wonder why we hadn't done this a long time ago.
Representative Brady?
Do you have more than one teacher contract in your SU?
No, actually, fortunately, we're all on one.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything further? Yeah.
That's one more question. So in your facilities, the amount of buildings, would, if we close 3 of your schools, and I'm not in any way suggesting this is where we're going,
Right.
would, if like Lake Region combined with North Country and we created a middle school, would that make it so that the numbers worked? If we had to close more elementary schools?
Numbers as far as money, cost?
Populate, like how many kids can fit in facilities?
Yes, the LR building, the high school was built in the mid-60s. And there hasn't been a huge, they've done, yearly maintenance and upkeep and have done very well with that. But we'll be faced with having to upgrade their septic system sometime soon. That came out of our facility evaluations. And then we've been looking at, could we put a middle school, attach a middle school wing? If the high school is to leave it entirely and something was going on up here with a combined high school between North Country and Lake Region, the high school LR could be reused and put to use for a elementary middle school. It definitely could, but the level of renovation to a building of that age would be staggering. Again, we can do any of these options. We can close 1 school, 2, 3, all of them, but we have to renovate and build. There has to be a new build option and plan, and that's usually a 3-year, 4-year, maybe even a 5-year window if you
And
leap off that ledge.
have any of those conversations, even at a sort of what if level, taken place between you and Elaine Collins or other people about like whether or not that is even a good idea to combine high schools?
We haven't had those formally. I think the fact that we had our PCB testing and were not found to have violated those levels, I think that put us in a little bit better place. But we haven't had those formal conversations about that. I would imagine that would be a administrative and board forum that would have to happen to start entertaining that. That very well could come out once we have our final Truex report, which is expected towards the end of June. Which will have our final long-term facility plan with four options.
And is North Country big enough for that even to be an option?
Our high school is right around 350 to 370 kids. So I think they would fit if it was at North Country.
Yeah.
I question whether that, again, I don't know all the details behind North Country Union High School. I don't know if with all the PCB issues and the age of that building, which is similar to ours. Renovation sometimes in a building of that size way outrun a new build,
Yeah.
most likely, but.
Penny, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with all of the changes you're making, especially as you sail down the retirement path. How is your district in active search for your replacement?
We found it.
We have
Oh, all right.
hired
All right.
wow.
this week. We have a new high school principal and a new superintendent. Jackie Ramsey Tolman will be the superintendent, and Sharon Gagne is stepping up as a
Oh.
from assistant principal to principal for Lake Region. So that just happened in the last 2 days.
All right, congratulations to have
Yes.
all of those pieces put in place. That's amazing. Yeah,
That is great.
great. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Committee will close